Thank you very much. Greetings from Norway. Are you related to Chris Spedding? Are you related to Chris Spedding? Like his son? Curious. Loved his guitar work with Robert Gordon. Are you by chance related to Chris Spedding, who played on the original Jesus Christ
Only just come across your channel.
Have to ask. Any relation to Chris Spedding?
I do wonder.
Are you related to guitar great Chris Spedding?
Even Quest is asking.
Chris, do you do private lessons? Have to ask.
I'm not
Any
Chris.
relation to Chris Spedding, the session player? Also, Chris, can you recommend a 20 to 30 watt amp? Now they think I'm Chris. All right, Chris, mate. How's it going?
Who's this? How'd you get my number?
Oh, I think we've got a joker in the room. You mind? You always crack me up. How you doing? You all right? Well, obviously, you've seen my YouTube channel.
I haven't.
Oh, a little bit awkward. It'd just be you that hasn't seen it then. Jokes aside, come on, you've seen the comments. Everyone's asking pretty much daily now if we're related. And I thought we could do a little video together and, you know, we could tell them...
Yeah, we're not related.
Yeah, not directly, but...
No, not at all.
Oh well, it's your loss, mate. You had to ruin it, didn't you? Anyway, you got 5 minutes, actually, just to answer a few questions from some of my supporters.
Not really, no.
Amazing. Right, here we go. Got a question here from Paul. He wants to know what it was like working with John Lydon.
Well, of course, I worked with them before they were known. And I took them in the studio for the first time. The band had never been in a recording studio before. So all his vocals went down live. So I don't think John realised that he could have overdubbed them. But we were doing it efficiently and quickly. The band was, I always say, like as good as gold. They showed up on time. They got set up. And I think about 11 o'clock in the morning we started. And by 5 o'clock, we had 3 songs all recorded and mixed. So I would always say that he was, with me, he was, you know, a bit of a smart ass, but he's a smart ass with everybody, but not quite so obstreperous as he is with other people, for which I'm grateful.
Yeah, of course.
We always get on really well, and I saw him quite recently, say 4 years ago. We were at one of those open air festivals in Europe somewhere, and I heard that PIL was on, so I went over and said hello. And he was, oh, Chris, great to see you, and all that, you know. So he's not a punk. He's not a punk ass with me. And of course, I was in 1976. I was far too old to be a punk. I was in my 30s by then.
Okay.
And you got to be young and angry to be a punk.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, I like him, and I found him easy to work with. Whether I'd find him easier to work with now he knows a little bit more. In fact, he knows a lot more, because I was the guy who knew everything then. I was the guy who knew how to my way around a recording studio. They hadn't even been in one at that time.
So you did this in London, at Majestic? Yeah.
Majestic in London, yes. Yeah. So that was an interesting thing to be around, especially when they became so huge and influential. I could say, yeah, I was around when, you know, nobody knew who they were.
Got a question here from Steve. It's a difficult one. He wants to know if you've got a favourite guitar.
Well, the favourite guitar to look at was the old Dwayne Eddie Cochran Gretsch 6120. Later made popular by Brian Setzer, the old rockabilly guitar. I mean, I first saw one of those in the 50s on an album cover of Dwayne Eddie, and I always loved the way it looked. Of course, the pickups are a little sort of vintage now and not quite as high-tech as the modern humbucking pickup song.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
They recently put out a modern version of it. Gretsch did, and so I had to get one. They're doing Eddie model, so just to have it, because they're beautiful looking instruments. But I gravitated to Gibsons with humbucking pickups, Les Paul, and I also like the SG Junior with the P90 pickup, single P90 pickup. I used that a lot in the 70s. So I would say that's my favorite all-round guitar. It's so simple: one pickup, two knobs, and just really stripped down and basic guitar. I suppose a lot of people were saying the Flying V, but the Flying V was it was a great image thing, good for stage, but mine wasn't a particularly great guitar to play because you can never sit down and play it.
Sliding off the knee.
Yeah.
That's cool though. I'm glad you said that because a lot of people probably associate the Flying V with the times of, music videos or Top of the Pops, things like that. And yet the practicality of being in a studio and sitting down and on your knee, Flying Vs aren't that.
Remember you're a womble. Remember you're a womble.
I was actually going to ask this one myself, but Mike's got me covered on Patreon. He wants to know what it was like working with the Wombles.
What actually happened was I did a session with Mike Batt, and the songs were Womble songs, but there were no furry outfits in the studio, and we didn't prance around. So working with the Wombles or joining the group called the Wombles or leaving it or doing anything at all we did was I worked with Mike Batt, and Mike Batt's thing was the Wombles. And it was always a pleasure working with Mike because we really got on really well, and I knew what he was into. I dug the sort of power pop thing, and the fact that he was very talented in the arranging and the writing, and the fact that he went on Top of the Pops in the suits prancing around was just something else altogether. I actually did do that once because there's a stupid rule that the Musicians Union had out. They had this slogan, keep music live, keep the musicians working, as if and the rule was that if you'd played on a record and the record got on Top of the Pops, the producer of the record had to ask the session musicians that played on the record to come and do the work on Top of the Pop, thinking that the guys needed the work. Like all the session guys, we didn't need the extra work. We had better things to do than spend our, I think Thursday evenings, I think it was, around at the BBC Television Centre when we could be doing like a day of sessions and getting paid better. Because me and Mike were buddies, and I thought it would be a laugh, I agreed to appear in the costume. I think I was Wellington, the guy who has the Flying V. But I'm not in any of the publicity shots or the album cover shots with the Flying V. That's not mine. They rented that, and there was somebody else. Kenny Jones of the Faces used to do it. He was a friend of Mike's as well. And very like Steel Eye Span family, all these groups that Mike, because he wasn't only doing the Wombles, he did lots of other stuff. He produced the first Family album. He did an album with Big Joe Turner, blues album. He had hits with Cliff Richard, with Alvin Stardust, way before the Katie Mello stuff. So it's not just a one-trick pony with the Wombles. Only, unfortunately, the Wombles' lead voice, is Mike's voice. So every time Mike tries to do one of his own songs and tries to get like a serious love song, everybody listens to it and saying, "Oh, the Wombles," which is a shame. I'd be very pissed off if that happened to me and I got like identified with a kiddies group.
Yeah.
Actually, a serious songwriter.
Coming back to the questions, got a good one here from Kit. He wants to know whether you prefer touring with a band or the session and the production work.
I like studio work, but I've realized that when I've gone away on tours, I'm really sort of not loosened up and not sort of so fluent because of the studio vibe. It takes me a good sort of couple of weeks of touring before I start getting into performing. And I realize that that's an important facet of the all-round musician has got to be able to do the performing side of things and be loose and spontaneous. And then when I go back in the studio after the tour's over, I realize that my playing has got so sloppy. And I realized that you got to have the two. After a couple of weeks of being sloppy in the studio, I realized that I'm tightening it up again, and then I have to go on tour again to get loose. So the two things bring out different sides of what I do, the craft side. And but I would prefer it if I was to get away with just being in the studio the whole time.
Okay.
Because, like one thing I always remember lots of people get to see you on tour, but especially in the old days when gigs weren't all automatically recorded. Everybody records everything now, and it's really good digital quality and everything. But back in the old days, if you had a fantastic gig and you played your ass off, it's gone. Next day, it's gone. It's kind of a waste because you play your ass off and it disappears into the ether after you've done it. Then you've got to match it the next day. But in the studio, if you play your ass off, it's on tape and you can just play it back. So I like that, the fact that you don't have to keep proving yourself and playing great. If you have a magic moment, the magic moment is there for everybody for the rest of the time, basically. So some people just get off on playing live and don't like the studio. I'm not like that.
Michael Cimino asks what it was like working with Harry Nilsson.
Harry Nilsson was famous for the Lost Weekend with John Lennon and all that fighting. There was nothing like that in the studio. It was all very serious and all very concentrated, and we didn't socialise, and there was no obvious drugs around, or there probably were. And I remember we would do like take after take. In those days, the 24-track boxes it was all lined up, piled up in Trident Studios, all these tape boxes, with about 100 takes of a song. And I remember we went home at the end of the evening, and I came back the next morning. They were still there listening to the takes because there was a huge ashtray and it was piled high with cigarette butts. They hadn't left.
Wow.
And I just heard Richard Perry say, "Okay, so it's take one then, is it?" And I don't know what sort of state they were in, but that's the sort of concentration of that stupidity. That was very common in the 70s, just because you had 24 tracks and loads of tape. You just used to go over it and over and over it. Nowadays, with modern recording, you don't do that. You put down a reasonable click track or a drum track and you keep on doing your bits until they're right. You don't do like 100 takes anymore.
Yeah. What take do you reckon they got up to? Did you weigh up how many cigarettes there were?
No. I just like the fug, you open the door into the control room. Whoa, dear. It was like, and you knew they'd been there all night.
Another question from Simon this time. He said he'd love to know about War of the Worlds with Jeff Wayne and how that came about. He also asked about your session work with Brian Eno.
Well, that was all around the same time in the 70s. I enjoyed working with Brian Eno because I was in the Sharks when we were supporting Roxy Music, and that was Brian Eno's last tour with Roxy Music. And I got to know all the guys because, as you know, I've played with Brian Ferry a lot since, and Andy Mackay, Paul Thompson, and all those Four Manzanera since. And I got to know them first at the same time as I got to know Brian Eno as supporting Roxy Music on that tour. And I enjoyed that connection. It wasn't too long after that I'd always worked with Jeff Wayne way back in 1969, 70 when I was first started doing sessions. He used to be known as the Jingle King. All the TV ads, he was the guy to go to. And the way the jingle business worked, he got a call the night before the session. So, of course, all the top guys, of which at the time I was one, were all had a full day's work. You couldn't call me on the night before you want to, you know. So what Jeff used to do, he used to know that double scale for the union, musicians unions, is from midnight to 8 a.m. So he booked us all at 8 a.m. for an hour. We would get a call late one night about this time. Can you do 8 a.m. tomorrow morning at Advision? And of course, we'd all be delighted to do that because our session day usually started at 10 a.m. So you had to go in the rush hour traffic in London at 9 o'clock to get to your 10 a.m. session. If you went to an 8 a.m. session, you had to leave at 7 a.m. and you missed the traffic. Not only that, you got a jingle session in which paid as well as a regular session. So that's how Jeff used to work, and we did all these jingles. And he was very diligent. I remember when he first hired me, he asked me to come over to his house. He was going to pay me like a session to tell him how to arrange this number. And it was like a Simon and Garfunkel track. Forget what it was, but it was all acoustics and 12 strings. And I said, oh, well, the way they get that sound, they've got two acoustics, one in the left and one in the right, and they've got like a 12 string as well. So Jeff said, oh, that's three instruments. Okay, well, come tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock and I'll pay you 3 fees if you're going to get that sound. So that's, he was very, he didn't spare any, he would reimburse you if you're going out of the way to tell him how to get this sound. And we always got on really well. I did a lot of his David Essex stuff. His David Essex, he was having hit after hit in the early 70s. And then, of course, the War of the Worlds thing came along, which was his major work. And I enjoyed doing that. And I didn't think that 30 years later would be, it was in the 70s, so it was about 2005, 2006 when we started going out on the road with it. And of course I wanted to do it because I was all over the original double album. And I didn't want anybody else playing my parts. But when I saw the score, I thought, I can't play that. That looks too complicated. But then I realized that everything that had been transcribed were my licks. Of course, it was only chord symbols when we were doing it with, and directions from Jeff, or we want it like this, want it like that. And we just say, oh, what do you think of this riff? And of course, he'd go, oh, that sounds great. That's just what I was looking for. But we weren't reading it. We were coming up with, like guitar players do, like rhythm sections do. The same with Herbie Flowers on the bass and the drummer. It was later on when he put the orchestration on. So all that was not written out. But later on, when I said I was going to do the tour, I get all my meticulously transcribed guitar licks, which looked very difficult to play. But when I realized that they were all my licks from the 70s, I was able to play it. But now going over it again, I've got to remind myself of what was, I have to remind myself so that I can give a good account of myself at rehearsals.
That's great. So it's literally you were coming up with things based on, like when you said it was like going around as a musical consultant. That's amazing. And you would come up with licks on the fly, riffs. They would be right. They would get transcribed back to you. And now you're looking at that kind of written out.
It's part of like the reason that he's such a good arranger and producer as well as composer is that if you want to get if you have a sound in your head and you know enough good musicians, the arranging part is like choosing this guy to do that. And this guy, I know what he's going to do. And if I hire him, he's going to do this. You don't have to write it out. And that's the way a lot of the Americans work. A lot of like the Motown people and all the people that we admire, the Stax and all those people, they don't score all that stuff out. They get the right guy that the producer or the artist knows is going to sound like it's a certain way, and said, okay, well, here's a little chord chart with 3 or 4 chords on it. Let's see what you can do. He knows damn well what he's going to do. He's going to do something great.
Yeah.
So that's the way Jeff works.
That's brilliant.
I'm all for that because I'm in that world as well. much better interpreting composer or arranger's wishes, better than reading it. I'm not the greatest reader, When I get something that I find difficult to read, I usually ask some guy, hey, can you sing me this? So as soon as I have it sung to me, I can play it.
Moving on the Queen's Highway, looking like a streak of lightning. I hate the gotta go, more like bike riding. I'm more like it.
Well, that's that mystery solved then, isn't it? You know what to do. Hit all the buttons. I'll see you soon.